I'm sure most of you have seen this video by now of the heated confrontation that occurred yesterday at the launch of the DAZN streaming service in the United States between Anthony Joshua and Jarrell Miller. Joshua was up there posing for pictures with mandatory challenger Alexander Povetkin, and Miller tried to, I guess, steal Anthony Joshua's thunder by heckling him in the background. Joshua turned round and, they faced off and started mouthing off against each other. It was what it was. Jarrell Miller was his typical self, calling Anthony Joshua a punk. He thinks Joshua was a coward. He thinks he's a fraud. He thinks he can't really fight. He just don't see anything there with Anthony Joshua at all. I think, as I've said previously, Jarrell Miller's doing the right thing. I think Miller is a lot better than people realize he is. I know that he's an abrasive character. I know that he is crass and gutter and classless. But this is boxing. This is fighting. This is violence. So let's not make out that it's such a noble art. It's the noble art of pummeling another man's head in. That's what it is. So I have no issue with Jarrell Miller talking all the smack. I think he is going a bit far when he starts talking about Anthony Joshua's mum, because he did. And Anthony Joshua was definitely not happy about that. He was a bit rattled by that, actually, by the fact that Miller said something about his mum. And he found out later. Miller didn't say it to his face. He found out later. But I'm sure Miller would say it to his face, to be honest. To be honest with you. Miller is a guy who really believes in this whole street thing with regards to boxing. He's one of these people who thinks that if you ain't from the streets, then you basically can't fight in a boxing ring. Now, once upon a time, decades ago, there might have been some truth to that. Why? Because if you go back to the 60s, the 70s, etc., even to some extent the early 80s, in the United States, people were fist fighting. Like, fist fighting was a big part of the street culture in the United States. Whereas, I want to say from the 90s through the 2000s and on, fist fighting really isn't as prevalent in the United States as it used to be back in the days. Nowadays, it's all guns and people jumping other people with 10 guys and stuff like that. In America, well, you know what they call it, shooting a fair one, or shooting the fade. And obviously people still do it, but nowhere near to the extent that they used to in the old days, when it was really a thing to be a formidable street fighter. For example, Mitch Green, he was a guy who the famous movie Warriors was partly based on, Mitch Green and his life. And Mitch Green got his name Blood from his days as a street fighter in New York, where he shot so many fair ones with people. He would always make people bleed in the fist fights. All right, so that's back when these guys were really tough, and fist fighting was something they did on a very regular basis. Whereas today in the ghettos in the United States, and the rough parts of Europe, UK, etc., people don't really fist fight anymore. In the UK, the only people who really fist fight like that on a regular basis are the gypsies. Nobody else is really fist fighting in the street like they did back in the days. And the same in America. People are shooting, people are doing this, that, and the other, all kind of punk stuff. And yeah, they're punching people up, they're smacking people from behind, and sucker punching people, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like fair fights, one-on-one fights, they're not so common these days. Okay, so coming from the streets, Jarrell Miller's from Brooklyn. I think he's from Bed-Stuy. Coming from the streets, what does it really mean these days? How does it really help you in a boxing ring? It doesn't. It really doesn't. The only way it helps you is if the other guy who you're fighting buys into the whole street thing and think, oh God, he's tough, he's from the streets. But in reality, how does it prepare you to get in a boxing ring and win a boxing match? Because a boxing match, is a controlled environment. It's not the streets in the boxing ring. You got gloves on, you got a ref, you ain't got your crew, you ain't got a gun, you ain't got a shank. You understand? You ain't got no type of weapon. You just got your two hands wrapped up in a pair of boxing gloves, your boots on, and you can only use your hands. You can't use your headbutt, you can't use your elbows, you can't use your knees. You know, this ain't K1. So none of that street stuff is going to help you in a boxing ring. I mean, Charles Martin is a guy from the streets in America. He's been shot. He's been in situations. When he fought Joshua, it didn't help him. He looked scared to death when he fought Joshua. Now, Joshua is not from a rough part of London. Joshua's from Watford. Yeah, he was involved in some criminal activity in his younger days, but being involved in crime in somewhere like Watford is, is child's play. Let's be real. If you want to talk about fighters in the UK, heavyweights in the UK who actually have some experience in terms of streets, then you look at people like Dillian Whyte, who has been, apparently stabbed. I heard Dillian Whyte say he's been stabbed, he's been shot. And obviously he, he's from Brixton, and definitely back in the days, Brixton was a tough place. So Dillian Whyte is someone who has that same kind of, street experience as a Jarrell Miller. But Dillian Whyte still lost when he got in there with Anthony Joshua, a guy from Watford. Do you understand? Dillian Whyte has had a more street, rough upbringing than Anthony Joshua. But it didn't make no difference in the ring. Because the ring is a controlled environment and you can only use your hands. Do you understand? But Miller is still caught up in this whole street thing and all that type of business. And from a psychological point of view, Miller, he is one of those fighters like Tyson Fury, like Muhammad Ali, etc., that tries to defeat his opponent in his own mind before he defeats them in the ring. This is his methodology from a psychological point of view. He tries to humiliate the fighter. He tries to degrade them by mouthing off and making him out to be a punk. He always talks about Anthony Joshua as being a model, saying that he wears thongs and, all this kind of stuff, which I find quite funny. Miller does all that to diminish Anthony Joshua in his own mind, so that when he goes in the ring, he's full of confidence against Joshua. And he's also trying to make Joshua second guess himself. So that's the psychological tactics that Jarrell Miller's using. It was an interesting confrontation. Apparently, according to Eddie Hearn, there was also a confrontation in the hallway later on after this confrontation on the stage. And Joshua came out the toilet, apparently, saw Miller and said, "Come on, let's go. Let's fight now." And Jarrell Miller went for him, apparently, and I don't know, whoever broke it up. Some people have suggested that this is a fake beef and that it was contrived by Eddie Hearn. I mean, it's possible, but I don't think so, because Jarrell Miller's been consistent with his behavior even before he was working with Eddie Hearn, before he fought at the Barclays. He was calling out Joshua. He was mouthing off. This is how Jarrell Miller is. So I don't think there's any act here. I mean, there's a video of Jarrell Miller confronting Berman Stavern. Berman Stavern is a guy that he was mouthing off about years ago, if you remember. And he went to the Heavyweight Factory, which is a gym in America. Shannon Briggs was there. And Jarrell Miller turned up to confront Berman Stavern, and Stavern went for him, and they had to split it up and all that kind of thing. So this is how Miller is. Miller is a confrontational guy. He likes to get in people's faces. He likes to wind people up. He likes to try and ridicule his opponents or adversaries. That's what he does, and I think it's going to work better than people realize. I'd like to see Miller fight Joshua or Wilder, and see how these tactics work against them from a psychological point of view. Joshua is a very experienced guy at this point. Even though he hasn't had a lot of fights, he's been in big fights. He's been in high pressure situations. So I would have to imagine that Joshua will handle it well, because he's been in situations before where guys are, getting mouthy and saying this, that, and the other. For example, the Dillian Whyte situation is a good one, because Dillian Whyte tried to fight Anthony Joshua in the street, right? Some people might not know this, but when Dillian Whyte and Joshua were in the Klitschko camp, you know, long before they ever fought each other in a professional fight, when they were in the Klitschko camp, they got into some kind of confrontation, and Dillian Whyte offered Anthony Joshua outside, said, yo, come outside, we'll fight now. And Joshua didn't want to go. You see, Joshua's not a street guy like that. Yeah, he's trying to keep it in the ring. He knows where his advantage lies. His advantage lies in the ring. He's not a street guy. And also, he's not a guy with kickboxing and MMA experience like Dillian Whyte is. So he didn't want to risk fighting Dillian Whyte in a street fight, because Dillian Whyte can do more than just punch. You know, and it'll probably be the same with Jarrell Miller. Jarrell Miller's also got a martial arts background. So, you know, Anthony Joshua really and truly, he don't really want that smoke with Jarrell Miller in a street fight. But lucky for Joshua, he's a boxer. So he don't have to worry about that. He has to worry about beating these guys in the ring. And I think Joshua's very confident that he could beat Jarrell Miller in a boxing match. You know, it's a controlled environment. There's no kicks, there's no elbows, there's no takedowns or anything like that. And yeah, just like with Dillian Whyte, he wasn't intimidated by fighting Dillian Whyte in a boxing ring. He didn't want to go outside with him and fight him in the street, because Dillian Whyte, that wasn't the only occasion in the Klitschko camp when Dillian Whyte offered Anthony Joshua a street fight. Also in the UK, he said, come we meet up here or come we meet up there and we'll fight. And Dillian Whyte's that kind of guy, he'll fight you. You know what I mean? In the street. Joshua didn't want it, but in the ring, it was a totally different ball game. Right? In that kind of environment, Joshua feels comfortable in the ring. He's fought Klitschko in a big pressure fight. He fought Charles Martin, which was a big pressure fight for him at the time. He fought Joseph Parker. In the amateurs, he fought the top amateurs. He went to Azerbaijan in a hostile territory, and he fought Jarrell. He fought the eventual winner of the World Championships in Azerbaijan, who was an Azerbaijani fighter. Fought him in the final, only lost by a point in front of the Azerbaijani president or prime minister or whatever it is. So he's been in high pressure situations. He's been in hostile territory before. He knows how to separate all the trash talk outside the ring from the real thing inside the ropes. And I don't think he would be the least bit concerned or intimidated by Jarrell Miller if they got in a ring to fight. However, I do think that Jarrell Miller would do well against Joshua in a fight. I think he would cause Joshua a lot of problems. So Joshua might not be intimidated when the first bell goes, but by the second, third, fourth round, when Miller's still coming at him, if Miller can take Joshua's power, man, Joshua's going to find himself in a real fight, and he's going to have to dig down. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the confrontation between Anthony Joshua and Jarrell Miller. I like what Miller is doing. It's great from a promotional point of view for Jarrell Miller, you know. Great for him. It's great for the DAZN platform to have this kind of beef kicking off, obviously. That's why Eddie Hearn's happy about it. Whenever Eddie Hearn talks about this beef, he's happy. If Jarrell Miller wasn't signed to him, if Jarrell Miller wasn't fighting on his shows, he'd be very dismissive of Miller, you know, probably anyway. But because Miller is basically making Eddie Hearn money right now, he's smiling when Miller gets on the stage and starts smack talking Anthony Joshua. He's smiling because he knows that's money in the bank for DAZN. Because instantly people will be like, I want to see this guy fight Joshua. You know? Not like it's going to be a substitute for the Wilder fight. It's not. I would definitely rather see Joshua fight Wilder first. That's why I'm saying I want to see Miller fight the winner of Joshua Wilder. But still, yeah, I think Miller's doing the right thing. Whether it's going to translate to success in the ring is another matter. I just think when it comes to actually fighting Anthony Joshua in the ring, all the smack talk won't matter. The only thing that will matter is Jarrell Miller's fighting ability. With regards to Deontay Wilder, I also don't think Wilder will be bothered by Miller's smack talk or anything like that. Miller actually said that he thinks that Wilder has a bit more heart than Joshua, you know. And again, he's used to that kind of attitude where you're shouting and screaming and this, that, and the other. He said both of them are punks, basically. This is what Miller was saying. He said Wilder's a punk too. Wilder only acts tough when he's got his crew with him. This is what Miller said. He only acts tough when he's got his crew with him. When he's by himself, he's not so tough. He said Joshua's just quiet, on the camera, he's like a robot, but behind the scenes, he's not very animated, but he swears and stuff like that, and talks like he's tough, but he doesn't believe it. Miller don't believe it when he looks in Joshua's eyes that he's really a tough guy. As I say, Joshua's not really a street guy like that. Yeah, he was involved in certain street activity, but he's not from an area where people are really about it. You understand? So he's not the kind of guy to be really taking you outside and fighting you. You know what I mean? I'm not saying he wouldn't do that to the average internet troll. Obviously, he'd fold the average internet troll in half. But in terms of a professional fighter, a heavyweight like Jarrell Miller, it's a different kettle of fish, particularly because Miller is a guy who is trained in martial arts. So fighting someone who's trained in martial arts as well as boxing is a whole different ball game. So anyway, let me stop rambling here, people. Those are my thoughts on the confrontation between Anthony Joshua and Jarrell Miller. I thought it was fun, and it could lead to a big fight down the line between Miller and the winner of Joshua Wilder, if that fight happens. So let me know how you feel in the comment section below. It's happening, I'm out.